So this is a canvas that's about 25 centimeters by 30 centimeters. I've traced my image on there with the A4 piece of paper, so I've got a little bit more sky and a little bit more ground, but that's fine. And this is just a store-bought canvas, but I've gone over it with some gesso with a bit of acrylic burnt umber mixed in, and I did that yesterday, so that's well dried, so that's ready to paint on. So one thing Kev was saying about sometimes the paint doesn't flow as nice and so on. Sometimes that is to do with a canvas that's not particularly well primed, that sometimes bought canvases just sort of suck the oil out of the paint and it's almost like hitting the brakes and so on. So if you buy some canvases and you think that's happening, it's always worth just giving an extra coat of gesso or even put a stain on it just to seal it, and you'll find the paint goes on much nicer. So the reference image is the same scene, but two photos that I basically just cut down the middle and put together. That this tree was just a bit further away, that left quite a big gap between the little shed and the tree, and it didn't work as well compositionally. So I just pulled them together. So hence why we've got slightly different tones in the sky. So I could have just put it into mid-journey and it would have given me several options, but I thought that's just being lazy. Let's try and do it from a photo. And even for myself, working from a photo is a bit more daunting than the mid-journey image or a master study, because none of the editing has been done. We've got to do it ourselves, and that's what you've got to think. You know, it is editing. You know, we can't paint all of this, or you know, we don't want to, or I don't want to, and I want to try and get this finished pretty much done this evening, and maybe I'll finish it tomorrow possibly. But a scene like this could be painted quite quickly. I think I'll paint the land, this area first, and most of this tree, just block it in, and then paint the sky in, and then put the details of the outer parts of the tree afterwards. And what stands out to me on this scene is really light against dark here, so I want to get that looking good. I'll leave that bramble out, but treat it fairly simply. You know, think about it. You know, how would I paint it if I was there out on location? And this scene isn't actually far from where I live, so I could actually paint it on location at some point. So where to start? You know, you can start anywhere. It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, if we're just going to put that color, that tonal value in the right place, you could paint there, and just keep doing it until you've filled the whole thing, you know. But obviously that's a bit like painting by numbers. So I tend to just go for an area that I want to perhaps, you know, get really well. So, you know, this area here, you know, if I get this fairly detailed, some sharp edges in there, and this looking really good, the rest of it doesn't really matter. And if anything, too much detail on this tree will detract away from here. So I'll mix up a colour for this hay bale here, which I won't use that brush because it's got too much blue on it. So just a small number 2 round brush there will do. So it looks orange, yellowy orange, so I'll just start with some of this yellow ochre. And I haven't got any white paint out. That's not going to be good. And good amount of paint out. So I'll just offer the brush up. You know, for quite a few years I would put the paint on the laminated photo and so on, but I think I'm quite happy now just holding the brush up to the image, and that gets me close enough. And I'm probably less worried about actually matching these colours exact anymore. That close enough is good enough. I do try to get the tonal value spot on. So a bit of red to warm that up. So it's a little bit too dark, and if I do get it slightly wrong, I probably would err on the lighter side rather than the darker side. So that's just a little bit warmer. A bit of that burnt sienna in there. A bit lighter. Obviously, every time I add white to it, it cools it off a little bit. So I maybe just need to add a bit of yellow into that. But no, that's close enough now. And I shall just block them in. Obviously, it's pretty much the same colour as my panel there, really. But I'm not painting strands of straw and so on. Just the main shape I see. The little bits of detail which will make to separate them, I'll put that in afterwards. Let's just keep it simple. So that's that part. I'll then take another brush and mix the dark in there. So the cobalt blue with a touch of that sap green probably will do the job. Add a bit of red. And it's a dark and it's fairly cool, so maybe playing warm colours against cool, that might be quite good. And then what I do is I kind of squint, and if I don't squint, I've got different colour tonal value there, slightly darker, slightly lighter there, but if I squint it all becomes one. So I'll sort of squint and go for the easy option and just treat it as one. We could always break that shape up afterwards if it needs it. So a nice crisp edge along the top there. And it does go lighter towards the outer edge there. So what I could do is just add just a touch of white into that mix, which will create a grey. It's not the right colour, but it's the right tonal value. And what I want to try to achieve here is that effect of depth in there that we're going to get looking into that shed there. So to do that, we need a soft transition from this to the dark. So I shall just manipulate that edge a little bit. And the contrast of the light and the dark will do that as well. So that's that part of the painting done. At the end, I'll add that those dried leaves or something over the top again if it needs it. So I can put this post in there, which if I just add a load of white to that brush that I used for the hay bale, that's close enough. And if I can just pull the brush down once, that'll look really good. So make sure I've got enough paint on the brush to do that. So to shake my hand too much and just pull that down. If you rotate the brush, the other side of the brush has still got some paint on it. And if you can leave that mark, the painting will look great, because you're not overworking it. If you could paint everything on here with just one brush mark, the painting would look amazing. And that's what John Singer Sargent went for, when he would wipe off his painting if he didn't get that one brush mark look to it. And again, if I sort of squint, we can pull all that into just one shape, flat shape. Ignore all the corrugated little bits in it. We could always add that in afterwards. Again, ignore that rusty patch. We'll put that on afterwards if it needs it. So if I add some white to my grey colour, it needs to be warmer. So I shall add some red. And just a small amount of that red because it's quite powerful. And that's close enough. That looks pretty good. You can always put a bit of paint on. It's possibly a little bit on the dark side. A bit more red and a bit more of that. But it's a bit too light, so I wanted to make it slightly darker. That's better. And it's amazing that it's all relationships colours, that this colour looks completely different against this orange than it does there. But I've put it on there. It's pretty much the same there, so just trust. And again, if I can just pull that brush down once, load it up. The fence and so on that's leaning up against it, we'll put that on afterwards. That's the detail. That there's a watercolor artist that I follow that he calls it the jewelry. That it's very different painting watercolors, but it's the same sort of thing really, that we're going to cover the canvas completely. which is setting the stage. We'll put the actors on the stage, which is the shed and the trees, and then we'll put the jewellery on afterwards, which will be those little leaves, the little posts and so on, and that's it. And the less we mess about with it, the better. So we've got a dark there again, so just blue and green, bit of red, just mix all those colours together until you get something that looks like a dark. And again, if we can do that in one foul swoop, that'll be better. And again, we want a little bit of blending here, but I won't use that brush because it'll just darken that too much. So, you know, it's why I have lots of brushes on the go. I'll just take a clean brush there, and then I'll just pull that in there. Less is more. And we've got a little bit of light on the front of that barn there. Through there. And then there's a dark on the top. You know, and that's not perfect, but it's close enough. It doesn't have to be exactly as the reference. So that's the tin shed blocked in at the moment. It's lacking the details on there at the moment, but we probably don't really know how much detail we need until we get the rest of it in. So let's have a go with these trees. So I'll use a slightly bigger brush. That's probably about a size 4 or 5 flat brush there. And go for mixing this green here maybe. So start with yellow and blue. Yellow and blue makes green. It won't be the right green. Obviously you could use sap green as well. No, it's just a good starting point. So it needs to be warmer. So the burnt sienna, I just put too much in there. So it's too brown. So I can put it back to green by adding more yellow and blue. And we need quite a bit of this, so it doesn't matter if we have a bigger pile. And that's pretty close. It's a little bit darker than the lighter value. So it's probably about the mid value, so I'll go for that. If we simplify these trees to 3 values, a mid value, which is kind of what I've got on the brush now, and a slightly darker value, and then a few highlights, and just keep it simple. So if we block it in with if you squint your eyes, it becomes 1 value. Mix that value or something close to it. So what's important is a sharp edge along the top of that barn. So a nicely loaded brush there. And at the back of the barn, because sharp edges draw the eye to where we want it to go. And I'm not going to worry about the little straggly bits off this tree, because when we paint the sky around it, it's going to cause us problems. So just keep it one solid shape. It doesn't have to be exactly like the reference, so something like that. And same with this over here. Just treat that as a solid shape. Again, we've got a fairly crisp edge there. And starting on this toned canvas, it doesn't really matter if we leave a few little bits of that showing through. That'll be fine. And just keep checking. You know, it's still about right for here. So here we've got more of a lost edge here. So again, you know, this could be done afterwards. I would take another brush there. We're probably going to be painting some of that orange leaves over there, but a softer edge is what's needed there. If we have hard edges all over the place, it doesn't let the painting read well as a realistic scene. But you know, this is perhaps, you know, how I would paint out on location, you know, quite quickly, not as perhaps slow as this, but you know, I'm trying to do it so everyone can keep up. But you could block this in quite quickly because the light is going to change dramatically, so we don't want to be hanging about. Obviously from a photo we've got as much time as we want to work on this. And this tree is slightly darker, but that's probably because it's a different exposure from the different photographs, so I think we probably could safely just block that tree in with this colour as well. And it looks very flat at the moment because it's just one colour, but I'm going to keep the paint thin on here because we're going to want to be putting some of that sky blue over the top of this. So not too much paint on there, and that connects to there. So that's that blocked in, and we've got a darker area here which we can push the contrast against light against dark here. So if I just add perhaps some sap green and blue, make a dark green. You know, I'm not sure what I did there. I think I just blocked it into, there was probably something there distracting. I think there was a big sky hole and I thought it distracted, so just a darker green in there. I shall just paint around where those posts are going to be. I think they'd be quite good to have in. And just paint that up into there. And with that darker green, we could just suggest a few darker parts in there. And same in here, but again, not just keep it as a solid shape. It'll be easy. It's always a challenge to paint alla prima in one go and not end up messing up the sky with the tree, but we'll give this a go, see if this works well. And again, there's a few darks in there, and I suppose I'm just sort of tilting the brush, just rolling it on and just creating a bit of texture, but it's only just subtle. It's not black paint, you know. That's a kind of a mistake we might make, is to go too dark with it, you know. I would ignore the darkness in this tree. This is exposed and the shadows are black, whereas exposed quite well on this, that the shadows areas are probably more realistic. So let's have a go with this grass area in the foreground. I shall stick with this brush. I'll just wipe it off and take off most of the paint. And like I say, it is more daunting working from a photograph or from life, because there's just so much information here with this photograph. But if we approach it the same way as if this was already a painting, such as a Mid-Journey image or a master study, and that's how it would appear, just single shapes, block it in, simple, keep it simple. So that was a bit of yellow ochre and yellow with the leftover green on that brush. So a little bit more green, so I'll use some sap green. So this is quite a warm green here because it was a sunny morning. So again, if I squint, all of this becomes one colour. That if you look at it and see all this detail, you see strands of blades of grass, bits of red, bits of orange, bits of green, dark green, so on, and it becomes overwhelming. How am I going to paint that? Squint, and it just becomes this warm yellowy orange. It's much easier to just block that in. And you kind of feel that, you know, this can't be right, you can't do that, you know, you're missing all the detail. But you look at some master paintings on Google, Arts and Culture and so on, you know, it's how they handled it as well. And that's the first challenge, is get that canvas covered. And we've got some orange going across there, which is going to look really good against that green. for that orange, I'll take a round brush and probably the burnt sienna. Again, just have a little look. Way too dark. So I'll just lighten it with some white, a bit of yellow, because I don't really want to cool it off too much. Again, it's still too dark. So it's cooled it off too much because I've added too much white, so I can bring it back with some red and yellow. It's got to be orange. Again, it's get it close enough. That looks all right. So I've got too much paint on the brush there at the moment that it's probably just going to put too much paint on there and it's going to cause problems. So what I'll do is I'll just run that brush through the tissue slightly and just take off a bit of paint and just lay that on there. And it's going to pick up some of that green, picking up the wrong pile. And again, we're going to need to come back and put a little bit of detail on there, but we're just bridging that grass area to the distance there. And that's fine for the moment, because we'll come back in, we'll put in some darks in there and a few flicks of grass and so on. And we could, well, we've got the same colour we used for the hay bale, which was a bit of yellow ochre and titanium white. And look at that tree. So we're just going to suggest a few branches. I think I did have a drawing there, but it doesn't really matter. Again, we'll aim to lose a lot of that and cover it with leaves and so on. And I think the good idea to paint the sky next, and it'll be easier to judge these colours and so on because it's difficult to see at the moment. So we've got a couple of options on the sky here. Really, we could just paint it as it is there with the probably cobalt blue and white. We could sometimes the horizon goes slightly warmer, so slightly more sort of yellow, but that might be quite nice. So I'll start with the cobalt blue at the top and see what that looks like. So cobalt blue, touch of white. So the ultramarine blue is quite purpley, so that would be difficult to get this colour with the ultramarine blue. So that's a sky blue, really. That's pretty much perfect for that. So hopefully you're enjoying this video. Please do hit that like and subscribe. Don't forget the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. And don't forget to check out those links in the description if you want to paint along with me, perhaps on a live stream, and have access to a huge library of full demonstrations like this. And I suppose what we've got to try and think about is if we just copy this photograph as is, it'll just look like that photograph. And the photograph is quite nice, but I know if I put this into Midjourney, it would come back with something quite arty and good, so we've got to try and do that ourselves to inject a bit of art into it. So I suppose that's my thinking. If I was going to paint this in watercolor, my kind of go-to sky on a sunny day is start with blue at the top and then transition to a warm yellow towards the base. So I'll perhaps give that a go without trying to get green. So here I can just go around that tree, leave a little bit of a gap. It's probably easier to paint the tree up into the sky. And if we end up with a few bits of orange around that tree, it'll look good anyway. So but what we want to avoid is green in the sky. Because we've got quite a lot going on here, we can have quite a simple sky that if you've got a very sort of calm landscape, you know, we could go for a more dramatic sky, or but we can have quite a simple sky. So I picked up a bit of green there, so I'll bring it down to about here, and then I shall mix some yellow. But what I'll use the yellow ochre. If I use the cadmium yellow, we will get green, but because the yellow ochre has kind of got blue in it anyway, if we just take a bit of yellow ochre. So this works in watercolor, so hopefully it will work with so very similar to the color we made for the post going up there. Again, just go up to, leave a little bit of a gap. We don't want green in there. And this might just give it a bit more warmth and atmosphere, I think. We'll just bring it up to that blue. Again, just yellow ochre, bit of white. So we need now to transition this yellow and blue without getting green. So I'll just wipe that brush off, take most of that paint off, and then let's just see what happens. We just feather that into there and just pull it up. Looks all right. And we could always, you know, paint over the sky and add more warmth and so on if we need to. But that's giving it a bit of a glow. Fine there. And again, it's hard to judge the sky until we get the rest of it in. So that's the canvas covered, and we're kind of heading in the right direction, so that's good. So what we need to do now is to basically finish these elements. So what we want to avoid, and that's what, if I prompt it on Midjourney, that's what we'll get. We'll get a painting that has a wholeness to it. That we want to avoid having a painting of a tree here, another tree, a shed, and then a field. It's got to be just one whole thing. So we've got to connect it all up. So we do that with the edges. So we'll connect the sky with these little edges from these branches that are going up into the sky. These are going to get lost edges where you can't see where the sky finishes and the trees finishes. So we'll do that with all those trees. We'll connect the hedgerow here by using these posts to connect to the side of here. There's some farm machinery or something here which we'll use to connect up in here. We use the long bits of grass to connect this hedge to the foreground. So what ideally we want is to, when you look at the painting, there's nowhere that doesn't have connection, that every shape connects into the next one, and that, you know, gives the sense of wholeness to the scene. So there's several brushes you could use to paint these little bits. That, you know, a fan brush would do a good job. A rigger will do it as well. You know, if you've got an old brush that you don't mind, you know, pushing out and punishing, that will do it as well. So I'll use a few different brushes to sort of to try. So go for mixing this warm green again. So just the yellow ochre into that green. A little bit more towards green. So this is where we can get caught out by overthinking about it and just messing about and overworking it. You know, what we want to do is, that's a branch, it's done, that part of the painting is done. If we have to mess about with that, we're just going to mess the sky up. And just turn the brush, just lay it flat onto there. You know, and all of these marks that you can lay down, and if they look very spontaneous, that's what you want. So that was using the fan brush. So we'll use the rigger. If you've not got a fan brush, you might have a rigger. If you load that up, I kind of make it go like that, so it's a bit splayed out. And again, it's laying the paint on top of what's there. We're not mixing what's, and you're not going to make exactly the same shapes of what's there, but that can grow to any shape, that hedgerow. So there is no right or wrong here, you know, and your shapes might be better, you know, and that's fine. So all we want to do is make that look, you know, a realistic looking hedge. Another way, just with an old brush, which you can, that's an old one, it's missing most of its, right, really just push it down and create this awful shape. That works all right, but if you've not got a fan brush, I'd highly recommend getting hold of a fan brush. I've only recently refound the fan brush that I think I wouldn't use it, you know, doing the sort of Bob Ross kind of trees. Nothing against Bob Ross paintings, that you know, it's just a different style. But using the corner of it, you know, using it, the side of it, laying it flat and so on, you know, you do get some quite abstract marks. And again, just taking inspiration from the reference image there. I know my trees never end up looking like the reference, that they're difficult. But just try and get the overall shape. But you're probably better off to get the wrong shape, but it looks fresh and spontaneous. Just keep moving that brush into different, a few little highlights in there. You know, and that's probably too much, you know. But keep going. And same for this one over here. It's a bit laborious, this bit. But there's no other. And probably find that the quicker you do it, and you just, you know, if you just roll that brush down there, the better it would look. Now, don't be too timid with it. And it's a case of trial and error. Try things, you know, you may not like those marks, you know, that that's what I tend to do all the time. I'll try something and think, oh, actually, I don't like that. You know, I'll try something different. And I'll try and get some darks in here. So I'll mix the cobalt blue with the sap green. And perhaps just try a flat brush, try something a little bit different. Maybe, you know, push the dark a little bit. And just roll that brush. That's always served me quite well. And with these darks, if you can connect them up, you can use these to get the eye to travel through the painting. Now bring that down here through that tree. Contrast, light against dark. But where we're putting this dark paint next to that white, you know, that's got to be finished, because we will end up with just a milky mess. So it is a bit of a case of accept what you've done. You know, it may not be perfect, but a fresh looking mark I think is better than something overworked. And then I can pull that dark down here. You know, and I think that thinking has come from sort of the watercolors I've done. You know, it's better to have freshness rather than perfection. And a few more darks in there. So that's enough messing about with those trees for the moment. I'll have a bit more work on this barn, because this is the bit that's got to look good. That let's find again a number 2 round. That'd be okay. So we need to make this look like a round bale of hay, and I can see some warm reddy brown. If I take a big dollop of that Azar Crimson and put it into that green, that'll give me a dark colour. That's too cold, too purple. So a bit of burnt sienna. That looks pretty close. So we need a little bit of finesse here. So why sometimes you just have a little practice run above the shape you're going to do. Let's zoom in a bit. But you know, if you just practice what you're going to do, look at the reference here. We've got a curve here. I can look at the negative shape between that post and where that curve is to get that. And again, you've got to try and really do it just in one go. You know, a fresh mark like that. There's the dark under there. And then I can see there's probably a piece of wood that runs the length of that barn there. Break it up slightly. And then there's just dark brown here. Again, I'm squinting. And I'm just going to wipe off most of the paint off that brush. So it's just a brush with just a little bit of paint left on it. And I'm just going to swirl around there. Maybe a little bit of paint on that. But, you know, that's probably enough. And a little bit of blue I've got there from the sky mixed in with that orange there, which will just cool that down. And I think that's enough. Again, a dark orange. I can just see a little bit of something there, just a shape. It's just breaking up this shape here. So I'll go with that for the moment. The orange down here is quite nice. So let's just take some burnt sienna. I think I shall clean my palette off in a moment. And a bit of yellow. Again, I'm just going to push down on that brush. There's quite a lot of paint on there. And the orange and the blue will create quite an unsightly neutral. So we just got to lay this paint on top of what's there. So I shall just roll the brush down. And that's the mark. And a little bit there. And it goes up into that tree there. So, and if I take some of this lighter mix, which was again the side there, just to lighten that, and just put a few lighter bits on there. And I use my rigger again with that light pinky colour. And it's just the value. The colour's not that important because we don't know what this is. It looks like some kind of farm machinery, but it just breaks up this shape. And that's fine. So I shall just move some of this out of the way. So again, as an artist, that you know, if this didn't have the rust patch on the side of this panel, it'd be a good idea to invent a rust patch there, because you know that's kind of distracting. But you know, as an artist, we should be looking to think, what could we add to the scene? What can we take away from the scene? You know, we need to break this up. So a rust patch on this barn is good. Maybe a few of those verticals, and then an old gate lent up against it, a bit of something growing up the side of it, and then these posts, and that'll be fine. So I'll take my rigger and I shall just try and just pull some of this dark down, and that works okay. And we don't need to do all of them, and in fact it'd be better not to do all of them, just a few. Got my brush with the dark on it. I'll just go up there, get rid of those. So that's broken that shape up. So the burnt sienna or the red oxide, much the same. The red oxide is just slightly more red. So that's more of a burnt sienna. Just add a little bit of blue to that. Just created that rust colour. And again, we just want to lay that on. So nicely load up brush, decide where it's going to go. You know, in the middle, is that going to be a problem? Is it better to perhaps put it towards the back slightly? And if I actually look at the reference image here, I've looked at it, that's in the middle. But in actual fact, if I take a measurement, you know, it's not, you know, it's slightly more towards the back. So that's why it looks okay on the reference image. But if I put it in the middle, it's going to destroy the painting. So let's move it towards the back. And then we've got a nice rusty patch there. There's a little bit in there, but be careful of that with photos, chasing the details. Just because it's in the photo doesn't mean you have to paint it. I've done that many times. Painted something that shouldn't have been painted. And then we've got these posts, which again, just a little bit of yellow ochre, a bit of white. One confident stroke, that's the post. If you've made it too wide, don't worry about it. I've just made it too wide. Another one there. The thing leaning up against it. And then there's a gate. This is a round number 2, but I can flatten it by just doing that on the palette. So it's got a chiseled edge. Do about 3, then reload. Now it doesn't stand out, so I need to put the shadows between between those. So I'll take another brush, and it's just going to be a dark brown, and I haven't got burnt umber brown on here, but if I just add green and the burnt sienna, that will kind of give me burnt umber, and a touch of blue. So that's about right for the dark. Again, I shall flatten the brush. And that's fine, you know, it's nowhere near the detail of what's actually there, but it does the job. And a couple of posts, again, just, you know, are they needed? I think so. It's quite good, those ones there. There's something there, doesn't matter what it is, it's just breaking up that edge. And again, mix the green, the yellow and the sap green. So, you know, I've used different methods to mix this green up, you know, a bit of yellow ochre. There's more than one way to mix these colours. You know, again, go back to there is no right or wrong way, whatever works. There's a green going here, just rolling up the side of the tin shed. Slightly darker. And I shall mix a nice dark with cobalt blue and the sap green, touch of red. So I've got quite a dark green there, and I shall just roll it down into there. And I've got a lot of paint on here now, so can't really be fussing with this too much, but we can put some darks in there. So this is again trying to connect some shapes up. I shall go back to my fan brush. Again, I use the fan and the rigger for this. Is we want to put some of this long grass up here to connect the shapes here. So I shall just sort this out here, which is just long grass there. That's fine for there. We don't need any more than that. Maybe we'll put a branch down there. So a warm colour, nicely loaded up. So we're putting orange over the top of green, so that's going to look good. Adding to that warm feel. I say could be the golden hour, you know, in the morning. It was quite early when I took this photo. And connection, we're connecting this hedgerow to this part of the tin shed. You know, and we can unify the painting by pulling some of this orange. You know, I start to then see a little bit in the tree there. Not too much. We can warm that up. And no, not every mark you make will be a success. You know, that doesn't, you know, I've probably overdone that a little bit. But there's no reason why you can't just try something. If it doesn't work, you know, just take a... Things, don't panic. Look on the tree. Yeah, that's about the right colour. I can put a little highlight on there just to get rid of that. you know, and compositionally, you know, maybe for me, I think, you know, a slightly taller branch there, just as acting as a stop there. That's right. So the grass area here. So when we squint, it all becomes this colour. But if we don't squint, we can then see these lighter values. So if I just add a load of white into that, just see where that takes us. So it needs to be warmer, a bit of red. That's pretty close. And foregrounds are always quite tricky. That, you know, if we paint lots of detailed grass here, you know, the viewer might not get past that because, you know, nothing else is really detailed here. So I would just kind of just really put it on and see what that looks like. And those marks will be smaller as they get further away, give that illusion of depth. So we've got a mid-tone and a light value, so we probably need to get a few darker values in there. Yeah, I'll just wipe that brush off. Mix up a darker green. So I'm just putting some sap green into the corner of that brown. That's pretty good. So we've got some bit of dark in there. A little tuft of grass. But again, I'm going to use these darks to take the eye into the scene. You know, maybe even create a bit of a zigzag effect. So I shall step back from it for a moment because I'm now starting to think, what can I do next? So that's normally a good indication that you're probably not that far from overworking it and doing stuff that doesn't need to be done. So I'll just do that a second. So it's looking okay. It's got the sense of light and so on. I think could put a little bit more detail in here. But it's got to be in keeping with the rest of the painting. So when I say detail, it's just a couple of brush marks that we can see inside the roof there. That was just a few horizontal lines there. So I've got some the same colour I used for here, and let's have a look. Way too light. So, you know, if I did that, it would cause a problem. So make it darker with a bit of blue and red. And it probably needs to go a little bit more towards grey and quite a warm colour. So it's probably reflected light from the hay bales and the grass in there. So yeah, it's kind of a browny yellow. So if we zoom in, and the roof is going at an angle. Now, and there's three or four I can see in there, but if I can only fit in two, you know, that'll do. And maybe just mix a lighter, if I just added a little bit of blue into that brownie mix. And I can just about see the back of the barn there. No, but we're getting in the territory of overworking it. I think I've got that a little bit on the bright side. I'll just mix up a little bit of a dark. Get rid of that. And I think I'm lacking some darks in there. And again, this is the kind of stage where we could overwork things, so it's a good idea to, perhaps get to this stage and then look at it again tomorrow. But that needs darker there, so we're pushing the contrast of light and dark, which will draw the eye. So I've just got some dark brown on the brush here. So I'm just pushing the contrast, light against dark. Negatively paint between that ladder or whatever that is there. Need a few darks in there. So the trunk of the tree needs a little bit of work. But I've got some of this cool blue over here. That the sun looks like it's coming in from this direction, so this side of the trunk will perhaps be in shade. So I think I've got it too cool. So just warm up that trunk. See that sunlight is hitting the side of that tree. So yeah, some sky holes, that's what's missing to break up this shape. So I shall take a fairly clean brush and have a clean cloth in my hand because I'll need to wipe the brush off. I've actually still got the original brush I used for the sky there, so I can use that as well. So I'll probably use a couple of brushes. So mix that blue. So the light from the sky coming through these trees will probably be slightly darker, but it's going to knock this blue back when it hits that green. So again, just look at the shape there, and we've got to lay the paint on top of what's there. And they won't look right, those marks, when you put them on, and you're going to want to fiddle with them, but then you're just going to end up with a complete mess of a tree. So just lay that paint on and just trust it will work. And I think this is quite a common way people paint tree with the sky holes, do them afterwards. They tend to look better. But the thing is, don't have too many. And we can make that trunk stand out a bit better. Obviously, bear in mind, I've done that wrong, that it's probably more yellow down there. So you have to, if you change things on the scene, you might need to yeah, it's more yellow at the bottom. take another brush, and we know that was just white with a bit of yellow ochre in there. So that's probably again, this is kind of connecting the sky to the tree. And if you do something on here and you think, oh, I've messed that up, you know, don't panic. You can either just scrub it off with the palette knife and repaint it, and probably better to do that tomorrow with fresh eyes. Breaking that up would be quite good, I think. But it gives it a little bit of sparkle, and you can, you know, if you've got some sky holes there that are just a bit unsightly, just mix up your green again. And just make them slightly smaller. I think with these trees, you either got to paint them very detailed and get them looking really tree-like, or just go for an impression of a tree, which is kind of what I've gone for here, because I want, you know, this to be the main focus. Again, connect that hedge to that tree, and a few warm little bits in there. Create an arrow pointing to that shed. Another one there. Lead us in. So just with the rigger, I think we'll just put a few little blades of grass in and then call it a day, because I shall overwork it. So not too much white, we don't lose the saturation. Again, you know, a better way I find is just make it into a bit of a odd shape, and just a few. And I think probably the best thing to do is take away the reference image, stop looking at it. And so when we step back from it, so that's the main area I wanted to get fairly detailed, but again, there is no real detail there. And I think the yellow glow worked all right in the sky. That's given it you know, quite a nice effect of perhaps made it more an evening look. There you go. Good luck with your painting. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe, and if you enjoyed this video, you'll love this one.